Hey there, I'm Marty Sakata, host of Resilient Alpha. You might know me from the Ivy Family Office Network, almost 3 decades of family offices and big shots collaborating on alternative investments, strategy, and good causes. That's the fuel for this podcast. Why Resilient Alpha? Simple. Why do some funds and managers crush it and others crash? We're cracking that code, redefining alpha, and bringing top brains to unpack asset classes and hot alpha ideas full throttle. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Welcome to another episode of Resilient Alpha. I am your host today, Shelley O'Donovan. And today I am joined by Kelly Bowker, who is the CEO of Dynamicare Health. It's a digital health company that's using behavioral science and contingency management to help individuals overcome addiction. Since becoming CEO in 2023, Kelly has led the company through significant growth, operational sustainability, and expansion into new markets. Previously, as the Vice President of Growth, he built strategic partnerships and secured major government contracts. With over a decade of healthcare, technology, and sales experience, Kelly has held leadership roles at Chess Health, Net Health, and Waystar. He holds a BS in Business and Ethics and an MBA from Western Governors University. So with that, I would just like you all to help me welcome Kelly to our show. Thank you.
The content here is for informational purposes only, should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investors or potential investors in any featured fund or deals on this video.
So I'd like to welcome you today to another episode of Resilient Alpha. Today we're joined by Kelly Bowker, and he's the CEO of Dynamicare Health, a digital health company using behavioral health science and contingency management to help individuals overcome addiction. Since becoming CEO in 2023, he has led the company through significant growth, operational sustainability, and expansion into new markets. Previously, as VP of Growth, he built strategic partnerships and secured major government contracts. With over a decade in healthcare technology and sales experience, he's held leadership roles at Chess Health, Net Health, and Waystar, and he holds a BS in Business and Ethics and an MBA from Western Governors University. So welcome.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thanks for joining us. So tell me what moved you into this leadership role at Dynamicare Health and what sparked your interest?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in healthcare technology broadly and behavioral health, digital health specifically for about the past half decade. And as I learned about the sort of core approach that Dynamicare has, contingency management and the mission of automating and scaling the best practices that we have in behavioral health, it really was compelling to almost give a sense of like justice, in that there's an injustice in the world that people who need these interventions don't have them. And so I can do my part to make sure that they get access to that.
I love that. And I'm just curious. So your company supports a range of addiction issues. So if you can tell me a little bit about, which issues it supports, and then what are some of the tangible impacts that Dynamicare has had on patients?
Sure. Yeah. So we cover a range of addictions, everything from opioid use, stimulant use like methamphetamine, cocaine, alcohol use, and even tobacco and nicotine vaping. And in terms of tangible impacts, Dynamicare's core ethos really it both has scaled a lot of these interventions, but also continued the research that has been ongoing for the last 50 years in this field. And what we've seen is a consistent doubling to quadrupling of abstinence rates across all of these substances.
Excellent. So I know that your technology works off a well-proven contingency management method, and that's been the subject of hundreds of randomized control trials. But can you explain to me what contingency management is and why that's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So contingency management, it's rooted in operant conditioning. And so you can think of Pavlov in the way that our brain chemistry works. We have a reward center in our brain. And with addictive behavior, people experience dopamine release every time they use or have their substance of choice. But what Dynamic Care is doing through contingency management, we're providing this sort of countervailing force of dopamine, which is small, frequent rewards that are deposited onto a debit card, which blocks access to bars, liquor stores, casinos, other risky spending. But it's this method through which they receive gamification and dopamine that's healthy for their recovery instead of negative for their lifestyle.
Interesting. So I would imagine just with this epidemic, right, of addiction in this country, there must be a lot of competitors coming into this space. So at the top of the food chain, there was Pear Therapeutics, and they had an IPO which was worth $1.6 billion at its height, only to declare bankruptcy in 2023. So what differentiates Dynamic Care from those competitors, and how do you plan to thrive where others may have been struggling in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this ties into the history of contingency management, which broadly as you mentioned, there is over 50 years of research on contingency management, but traditionally it really hasn't been used by treatment programs and also health systems. And there are a couple of reasons. One is it's historically been very difficult to do in practice. In the past, people have used something like a fishbowl model, where you would come to group therapy, for example, and draw a slip of paper out of a bowl, and it might be a small reward or it might be an attaboy, right? And that's difficult to scale. A question that comes up often is about compliance, whether it's spoken or unspoken. It's sort of is this you're giving money to patients to do what they should be doing anyway, and is this a kickback or is it treatment? And so that was sort of the environment really up to 2016 when Dynamic Care was founded, and we set out to both automate and scale contingency management, but also overcome those barriers, which we've done successfully. Now, to answer your question about Pear Therapeutics, they really were working on establishing the market. And so we've benefited from the sort of the tailwinds, so to speak, that they established by kind of chopping with their machete through initial foray into contingency management and expanding a lot of knowledge about what contingency management is. And so as a result, we've benefited from rising awareness about CM and adoption of CM. But we also have always operated our company in a much more fiscally prudent fashion. We're more bootstrap oriented and also careful about the investment that we take on to make sure that it's aligned with our core ethos.
Excellent. And so that leads me to my next question, which is really all about your business model. So what does your business model look like? What are your projections maybe for next year and then even further down the road?
Yeah, for sure. So our core business model, it's on a pay for engagement basis. And we've done that to make sure that our incentives are aligned. And that's with the public health systems, states, payers, Medicaid, commercial insurance companies. Those are the sorts of entities that actually pay for this service to be delivered to their patients. And the core model is pay for engagement, where if the patient does not continue with Dynamic Care, then they're not billed for any usage.
Okay, excellent. And you raise another question just around Medicare, and certainly Medicare tends to push forward other payers to pay for different modalities or different prescriptions. So can you speak a little bit to that and where you are with that?
Yeah, sure. So Medicaid and Medicare, CMMS, really are, I think, again, we're on the frontier of contingency management delivery. And so there are some states where there's been Medicaid adoption through like an 1115 waiver. which again is sort of groundbreaking for this field. Dynamic Care specifically has led the sort of forefront of delivery here with a pilot that occurred in West Virginia, which involved all of the Medicaid MCOs across the state.
Excellent. And so can you speak a little bit to your customers and also what aspirational customers you might have? So I think we all probably have somebody who's been touched by addiction in some way, shape, or form in our lives. So it'd be great to hear about who you anticipate those customers to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Addiction is a growing problem in the U.S. And it's also something, like you said, that touches every one of us in some form or fashion, whether it's direct experience or friends or family. And so when we think about who we can impact with a service, again, it's really anyone who needs who's struggling with addiction across those substances: opioids, stimulants, alcohol, tobacco, and nicotine vaping. And so the way that this is delivered, and really who our ideal customers are the health systems. So broadly, this is like public health in Medicaid and also commercial insurers, where they have an really astronomical cost for their members with addiction versus without. And also we look at the government contracting with the states directly and with now counties too. There's over $50 billion that has been dispersed through various opioid settlements with the manufacturers and distributors of opioids like Purdue Pharma. And these funds are anticipated to continue for the next 18 plus years. And then finally, we also are working directly with EAPs, and through EAPs like Spring Health, large employers.
Excellent. That's excellent. So if some of our listeners are just interested more from a personal perspective, where would they go to find out more information about Dynamic Care?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is the best place to get started. We do have several studies that are NIDA funded that are ongoing currently. And so if there's someone that is in your sphere, or you know of someone who has an addiction that they're wrestling with, then it's definitely worth reaching out to see if there is something that would be covered as an available service.
And then what about plans for direct to consumer? Have you thought a little bit about that, or is that in your plans down the road? Or
Yeah. I will say direct to consumer is difficult. We had a direct to consumer program that we have suspended for now, but we would love to bring that back at some point in the future.
Excellent. And then in terms of Medicaid, we've certainly seen, the spending bill in Congress right now. We don't know what's going to happen, but sometimes, even not just in this year, we've seen Medicaid, taken shots at. So how do you think that might impact your organization?
Sure. I think it makes it all the more important for Medicaid plans to be cost efficient. And because Dynamic Care has a positive ROI, that's, I think, one additional reason why they should be working with initiatives like this right now, because the reality is that they have high utilization and high cost of care for patients with addiction. And I also want to add that the nature of addiction is changing right now. It's getting more severe. And that's because of the change in the drug supply that we're seeing, where there is an increase, really a fourth wave of the drug epidemic that's occurring with the increase of stimulants like meth and cocaine, which are now also laced with fentanyl. And so you have, this challenge that is in front of states and payers right now, where their patients are sicker, their costs are higher, and they don't have any solutions.
Interesting. And do you find that in terms of your contingency management, that it works differently across the different addictions, or is it pretty standard across each addiction?
That's a great question. What's fascinating is that contingency management has almost a pharmacologic effect because it's targeting the brain's reward center. So it's not at the outer thinking layer of the brain, but it's really at the inner reward center of the brain where that drives our behavior. And that means that it works across demographics, it works across socioeconomic strata, because it's something that is deeper than sort of any of those differences.
And so the one thing you hit on right there that I'm interested in too is just from a perspective of social status. Do you find that these rewards are enough for different levels of incomes of people, let's say, to reward them enough to change their behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I think, really fascinating data, and it's great to be on the forefront of this. But when we look at the data that we have, we're working both with Fortune 500 companies, where we see a lot of sort of white collar addiction recovery, and then we also work with a lot of Medicaid, uninsured, underinsured populations, and the effect size is consistent across all of these. There was some really interesting research even in the early 2000s that looked at white collar recovery, and for things like physicians and attorneys who are at risk of losing their license because of addiction, contingency management was found to have a consistent effect. And even at a 5-year follow-up, that effect was still consistent. So it really is phenomenal how, it's not so much about the money. It's really about how can we capture the attention of the brain's reward center. So it's not something that is going to pay your bills, or, we're not paying anybody's rent, but it's just enough to capture your brain's attention and also reduce ambivalence. It's the difference of, I'm sitting on the couch. I know I have a therapy session in 2 hours. See a reminder on my phone, and for $3, I'll go to my session. It's that sort of psychological change, and so it does work across demographics and socioeconomic strata.
And it sounds like, from what you said, it's also long term. So it's not like a quick fix and then, I don't know, a few months from now, I'm going to be back in the same behavior I was in before. So it sounds like it can continue long term to reward people to kind of push through and get to the other side of addiction.
That's right. Yeah. Dynamic Years program is structured as a 12-month model. And we actually combine contingency management also with coaching from people who have lived experience, they're peer support specialists, and then we have CBT modules that are available in-app. And so the way that this works is at a high level, we take people from receiving instant gratification for addiction initially in the program, they're receiving instant gratification for recovery. That's the contingency management rewards. But over the course of the 12 months, we take them to working on delayed gratification. And that's things like saving up for a car or an apartment, or maybe rebuilding trust with loved ones, the things that drive you, me, and everyone else. And I think that's the difference, because when you look at the research, the combination of contingency management with what's known as community reinforcement approach, it yields the longest term impact in terms of addiction recovery. And also the odds of long-term recovery double if you can get to a 12-month mark of abstinence. And so that's why the program is structured in that way.
Excellent. And can you talk a little bit to some of the fundraising needs that you might have coming up, or any thoughts on, where you are in that process?
Sure. So just to kind of trace our company arc, we were founded in 2016. We've raised about $7 million in venture funds and an additional $7-8 million in research. And at this point, we're very close to being cash flow positive. And so we are eyeing and kind of looking at, the ways that we can make impact, and thinking about what comes next for us. We are at an inflection point in terms of the company's growth. We're doubling revenue year over year. And so we sort of have some options in terms of, well, do we look toward a next round, or do we just eye sustainability and profitability?
So the one thing that I'm interested in, just because my background has been in healthcare, and I've worked on advocacy campaigns with various diseases and things, but the patient is so important in everything that we do in healthcare. And so I'm curious, any compelling stories from some of your patients that have been engaged in the program, and what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best part of my day is I get these email notifications, and we have feedback surveys that are directly from our patients. And I'll see this throughout my day where it just pings, and we request positive feedback, negative feedback, sort of how the program's working for them in their lives. And so the trends that I see are that for them, dynamic care, it feels like a pat on the back. When early in recovery, a lot of times recovery can feel very punitive. They may be involved in coming out of incarceration, or at risk of losing their family, or other things like that. And because dynamic care it's a reward-based program, it feels very different. And so, there are specific examples where the story of a patient who she talked about how the app helped her show her daughter all the sort of proof of work of her recovery, where she could show her daughter, hey, look, I went to this appointment. I tested negative. And she was saying, I know I did the work, but this app helped me get there. And in a similar fashion, we hear a lot about motivation and accountability. Those are two consistent themes where it's motivating to have this sort of pat on the back, but it also provides accountability, usually accountability to themselves. That's what people care about the most.
I love that. So anything else that we haven't touched on that you think our audience should know about dynamic care?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the change in the drug supply and where addiction is going today, as I mentioned earlier, we're in sort of this fourth wave of the drug epidemic, with the use of stimulants like meth and cocaine increasing rapidly. And that puts treatment programs and clinicians sort of at their wits' end about how to address those problems. And some of the leading medical authorities in the field, the American Society for Addiction Medicine and AAAP, have put out guidelines for treatment of the stimulant use disorder. And they call for the practices that dynamic care uses: contingency management, cognitive behavioral therapy modules, and also community reinforcement approach as what should be standard of care. Because right now there is no medication for stimulants like meth and cocaine. We have medications that work for opioids, for alcohol, for tobacco, smoking, etc. And so, I think that's part of why, the timing is now in terms of expansion and the work of getting this into the hands of people who need it.
So Kelly, the one question I had was, as a patient, so if I happen to be a patient of yours, can you walk me through what the journey looks like for me, what it looks like from my end of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So patients of dynamic care, oftentimes they're referred by a treatment program. They may already be taking a medication like buprenorphine or Vivitrol, and they typically would receive testing equipment and connect with Dynamic Care's team. And then there's sort of this call and response between the Dynamic Care app, and what we give them is a smart debit card. And with the smart debit card, that's how they get these small, frequent rewards that are the basis of contingency management. And they get those for performing behaviors that are healthy for recovery in the smartphone app. And so these are things like they do remote random substance tests. We have a Bluetooth-enabled police-grade breathalyzer device, and also saliva tests, just like a COVID rapid test that they complete over selfie video. And they get rewards for testing negative for their substance. They also get rewarded for things like attending treatment or attending, it could be self-help groups like AA or NA or Smart Recovery. And we have CBT modules that they can access anytime on demand in the app. And they're short 2 to 5 minute worksheet modules, and they get a small reward for completing the module. And then finally, beyond the high tech component, we also are high touch in that Dynamic Care has on staff what we call contingency management guides. And these are coaches who have lived experience with addiction, and they meet weekly with patients over telehealth to help coach them on their recovery and work on longer term delayed gratification for recovery.
So I'm guessing these coaches, if you will, they would know if someone wasn't getting any rewards or they were kind of dropping off, or so they have a back end to see that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we deliver measurement-based care because coaches, they'll have on one side of the screen the behavioral performance data for the patient, so their earnings, their tests, the results of their tests, the results of their appointments, and then on the other side of the screen, they're meeting with the patient directly, and so they're coaching to all of those aspects of the program.
I just want to thank you for joining us here today on Resilient Alpha, and we're going to go into a lightning round here for a few minutes. Thank you. So welcome back for our lightning round. Quick questions for you. So these are quick answers too, hopefully. Is the opioid addiction going down, up, or the same?
Great question. So we saw kind of a peak during COVID, especially with all of the isolation that people were dealing with. And now we've seen a slight reduction, but this is on a decades-long trend of increase. Now, I think the other challenge that we're experiencing right now, as I mentioned, is this change in the drug supply, which is, it's not just opioids anymore. We're seeing stimulants, also substances like xylazine mixed into the drug supply. And so it's really polysubstance now, as opposed to just opioid use.
And what metric will you tell that Dynamic Care made it? Like, we made it, we got this.
Yeah. We have a million life mission. And really our drive is to not replace brick and mortar treatment, but to come alongside brick and mortar treatment and to elevate the quality of care, because it's next to impossible for treatment programs to do CM in a way that is compliant and scales effectively. And so I think when we've been able to impact a million lives and see the quality of care improve across the states, that's when we'll know.
That's great. And what is the best feedback you've received from an enterprise customer?
I think there's two forms of feedback that we've received. There's, of course, the financial feedback in finding, for health plans, finding a positive ROI on Dynamic Care and on the cost of the program. But then also just looking at the clinical measures. And probably the best place that we've seen that feedback is really in the research, because that's where it's quantitative data that we can trust that is across a sufficient number of people. And so we've consistently seen a doubling to quadrupling of abstinence rates over all the substances that we serve.
And what about the best feedback you received from an actual end user? We talked a little bit about this earlier, but is there anything else that stands out?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a survey recently that was, I assume, from an adolescent who was talking about how the program helped them attend not only therapy, but also their court appointments, and also helped with their relationship with their mother. And so that's just one example of many of how the program, it has such a profound impact on people's lives.
That's amazing. And so what percentage of enterprise customers have renewed?
That's a great question. It would be high 90s. The vast majority of our enterprise customers do renew. Typically what we'll see as a pattern is we'll see initially a small pilot that gets renewed and expanded.
And can you just remind us, just in a brief, snippet, what is behind that human psychology that motivates us to seek these rewards as humans?
Yeah, it's dopamine, right? We get dopamine in a lot of different ways. We use our phones as dopamine, social media as dopamine, but that's the same brain reward mechanism that we're using by delivering rewards. And the thing about these rewards is that they also have to be universally desirable. There have been some programs that have used like gift cards, like Amazon gift cards, but not everyone has an Amazon account. Not everyone wants the same thing. Gold Star doesn't always work. And so that's why we've settled on this approach, which is cash-based with protections built in.
Excellent. And then can you speak a little bit to retention of patients? So what does retention look like?
Yeah, great question. So for the addiction treatment industry as a whole, looking at national claims data for buprenorphine retention, it's typically around 13%. And that's at 12 months. It's abysmal. And that's why typically we see this pattern of repeat treatment, repeat inpatient stays, repeat emergency department utilization. With Dynamic Care Health, our retention is just shy of 50%. And that's at 12 months.
Excellent. Excellent. And so my final question for you is just how folks can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Our website, dynamiccarehealth.com, is the best resource. And then I'm also active on LinkedIn.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. And thank you for giving us so many things to think about and just a really neat product that's coming forward to help folks with addiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.